Welcome to Planetary Gig Talk, Tales of Music and Magic. I'm your host, Jefferson Glassy, Chief Spiritual Dude of the Planetary Gig Society, whose mission is creating unity through music, but as I also like to say, making connections through music with the intention of bringing peace. And today I am here in Studio 1 of the worldwide headquarters of the Planetary Gig Society, and our guest is up north in Maine, and I am so very happy and pleased to be able to have the opportunity to talk with a fabulous musician, beautiful, beautiful guitar player, Will Ackerman. Thanks so much, Will, for taking the time to be with us today.
My pleasure. I do need to make one correction already.
Okay.
I actually live in Windham County, Vermont. My assistant, Virginia Anjou, who's been with me for 1 billion years, 42 years, lives in Maine.
I should have known that because I talked with Scott Ainsley not that long ago, and it was just a little, misspeak, but whatever. Vermont, you've been in Vermont were you born in Vermont?
No, born in Palo Alto, California.
Wow. So you, I've listened to a lot of your music. I just love the guitar music that you play. And you've done so much really for the music world when you started Windham Hill Records in the 80s, I guess. Is that about right?
Yeah. Yeah, I think, my first recording, I believe, was in 76. So, and I think the label name first came into use in 77, 78. By the time we recorded George Winston in 1980, we already had 11 records in the catalog. So, let's call it 76.
Wow. Well, and at some point back when, I remember seeing some of those Windham Hill records and just thinking, this is great music. I just really liked it, and I still do love it. So thank you for all that.
Well, it's our pleasure.
So when did you start playing music? Were you a young child? Did your parents play music? Was there music in your household? How did you start on this musical path? Picked up a guitar one day, or what was it?
Music was always incredibly important to me. As a really young kid, in elementary school, a girl named Nini Gerard started calling me Jazzbo not because she knew anything about jazz or I did, but I was just constantly listening to music of one sort or another. There's one story I love where I was way into rock and roll in the 50s, and I was born in 49. But very early on, my dad, I think I was in 5th grade, my dad bought me a little turquoise transistor radio, and it was a real novelty at that time. But I used to turn on KGO radio, and Jim Lang, who ended up being the guy who ran the television program, The Dating Game, he had a program on in the evenings out of KGO in San Francisco. But I would sneak the telephone into my room, and under the covers, I would request things. And Jim Lang got to know my voice and would always respond. And it's like, what did he call me? Geez.
You were a frequent caller, huh?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And so I would be under the covers and requesting stuff and the rest of it. And my dad came in, what are you doing? And I'm talking to Jim Lang on KGO radio. And so my dad takes the phone and starts talking to Jim Lang. He called me Tiger. That was it. And he would, on the air, he would say, hey, Tiger's calling in requesting this today. So, I was like this kind of character in his radio world. But my dad finally talked to Jim Lang, and I went up to KGO radio in San Francisco and did a little interview with Jim Lang.
Wow.
On the radio. And I remember going back, behind the scenes and seeing all these promo records, and something about that, like I began to see, the record companies and their radio stations, and I got a little bit of an education. the other part of this story is that the Kingston Trio were in Palo Alto. I mean, Dave Gard was at Stanford. Nick Reynolds and Bob Shane were at Menlo College, but I used to go see them play in the basement of the student union at Stanford. And then these guys became mega stars, right? I mean, they were incredibly successful. But I think something about seeing these guys just as guys and then seeing them become stars, I think that was sort of way back in my mind. I mean, I learned a lesson. It's like, no, music is made by people. It's not a distant thing. And somehow that experience at KGO and knowing the Kingston Trio as I did, somehow or other, it was implanted. I mean, you're young and impressionable, right? And suddenly it's, no, music isn't distant. It's right there. It's human beings making music. And I think that was part of what made Windham Hill possible. Although that said, Windham Hill I just saw as, well, maybe I'll sell 300 copies of this record. I expected that with this minimum order, I'd have 150 in my basement for the rest of my life. I mean, I had no real belief that I would be able to sell these records.
So what you said is really strikes home to me, because I think as a kid and through a lot of my life, honestly, I thought music was out there. It wasn't necessarily something that I could do. I fiddled with harmonica a little bit, but it wasn't close. So when you were calling in as Tiger, were you playing music at that time? Had you picked up an instrument, or were you sort of listening and you were discovering, and then you started playing music? Did your dad play music? Did your mother play music? Or?
There was a piano in the house. My father played it a bit. There was a violin that sat on top of the piano, but I don't think the case was ever open. But from a very, very young age, music was incredibly important to me. I think one of the important things that I can talk about, and then there's a circle around to this guy, Michael Kilmartin. Michael lived next door to me, and he was the kid you always wanted to be. He was the captain of the football team. He was good looking, and then he started playing music, and he had a band called the Debonaires. And his sister recently, Michael passed away not too long ago. His sister sent me a picture of him and his band. All the matching suits, right? I mean, this is before Beatles, so it's really kind of silly, but there they were. And I remember hearing the sound of music coming from their house, but it was different, something I hadn't heard before. And I went over and went upstairs to Michael's bedroom, and there was Michael with a Gibson Starburst electric guitar. And he said, "Here, come play this thing." What are you talking about? I mean, I don't know. He said, "No, here's A minor and here's G." And I play they're still my two favorite chords together.
Wow.
And then let's fast forward. I have just recorded Turtle's Navel. The only store in which it's being sold is the Plowshare Bookstore on University Avenue in Palo Alto. And I haven't seen Michael for a million years. I've been off, in prep school on the East Coast and swimming for, prep schools and all that nonsense. And I turn the corner, and there's Michael Kilmartin coming down University Avenue. And I said, "Michael, God, this is incredible. I mean, you're the guy who first put a guitar in my hand, and I just did this little record." And we walked into the Plowshare Bookstore, and I handed him a copy. And he took it home, and he called me a little later and said, "Will, this is an amazing record." And I said, "Well, thank you. I'm glad you're happy. Well, I'm liking it, and people seem to like it." He said, "Can I have 10 of these?" And it's like, "Sure. You're the guy who started me. Yeah, here's 10. And I didn't even ask him what that was about. I just thought he wanted to give them away to friends. And he called me a couple of weeks later, and he said, just so I can explain to you what's going on, I am the radio promotion department of Fantasy Records. And understand they had Creedence Clearwater Revival at that point. So in point of fact, he was probably the most influential radio promotion man in the world at that time. And he sent it out to 10 radio stations, and he'd already done that. And he said, "I've sent these, now I've sent these, and people are going nuts." And the first 10 stations, I remember Kazam in Seattle and Kink in Portland, KCRW, and K-Twin in Minneapolis. And I remember all the names of these first 10 guys. Tom Pellicero was the music director at K-Twin. Anyway, so I'll go around the country, and suddenly I've got 10 of the most influential FM stations in the country playing the hell out of my record. Wow. And just because of this crazy thing with Michael Kilmartin, right? I mean, he teaches me A minor and G, and the next thing I know, he's in charge of, promoting my record for free.
That's amazing.
I remember calling, he said, you got to get on the phone to talk all the music directors and talk this up. And he gave me a list of the guys and numbers, and I called Kazam in Seattle, and I said, is John Kurtzer there? And the guy said, no, John's not in right now, but I'm Jeff Hyman, the assistant music director. And I said, well, I'm Will Ackerman. And he went nuts. He said, who are you? We got this little record, and there's a picture of a little girl on the cover, and there's no address for any. We didn't know where you were, and we talked a little bit. And he said, "What are you doing next Saturday?" And I said, "Well, nothing in particular." And he said, "Well, we've got a concert going, so come on up." And I got in my wife's car and drove up to Seattle with my cousin Alex DeGrassi. And we turned up at the station. We were a little late, and the assistant music director, Jeff Hyman, was crazy. He's like, "You're late." I'm like, "Late for what? I don't know what you're talking about." So he said, "Just follow me." And all I was doing is following his license plate through Seattle. And finally we came to a stop, and he said, "Grab your guitar, follow me." I walked in the back of a big building, and it's dark. And he said, "Go out there." And I walk out on stage at the Seattle Opera House. There's 3,700 people. That's my first paying gig in the world.
My gosh.
So it was from 0 to like 100,000 miles an hour in a second. So my first paying gig was the Seattle Opera House with 3,700 people.
Wow, that's amazing.
That's the whole story of Windham Hill, though. I mean, doors just flew open. It apparently served a really important part of people's lives musically that just wasn't there.
Yeah. So you said that when you went up into his room and he showed you A minor and G, that was sort of the beginning. But what kind of, he was playing different sorts of music, and you were listening to different sorts of music. How did you? What did you first start playing, and then how did you come to the style of music that you play?
I'm not quite sure. I think I went through, a bit of the folk thing. In prep school, we had, kind of a third-rate band playing, Beatles, whatever was happening in between, around 1967.
A lot. A lot.
There was a lot of good stuff. And my roommate, Jim Baldwin, and I, along with Ray Kirk and Roy Taylor, had created a band, I guess somewhat inspired by the Beatles. We played a little bit of Beatles. We weren't particularly good. And that was the beginning of things. I'm trying to figure out when the idea of just going out with an acoustic guitar really happened. I think, I've said this in other interviews, I'm not certain, but I'm quite sure that I heard a John Fahey record somewhere down in Big Sur. I think I was down there with my friend Steve Webster, and it was a kind of a night thing going on, and there was this guitar record, and I'm guessing it was Fahey. And I think hearing that solo acoustic guitar probably did have an effect on me.
Yeah, that John Fahey was beautiful. He was a little, I don't know if dark is the right word, but your music just, to me, is I listen to the style all the time. It's very soothing, peaceful, creative, pensive, optimistic. For the most part, I don't know if you agree with all those terms, but it just is very. It's soothing. It's wonderful, and all the whole Windham Hill style is like that. And about 4 years ago, I decided I wanted to play guitar, and so I'm taking lessons. I'm working on it, and trying to learn how, and trying to feel the music and be able to play, what you want and all this. How did you start doing that? Was there a feel? I mean, you heard the John Fahey tune or something like that, the record. Was there something you were trying to create from inside, or just was sort of what you were hearing? I mean, it's really, I think it's just amazing, amazing songs that you do.
Well, one of the things I think I have to say about myself and your understanding of me is that there's almost nothing that was intentional. There was never a plan, people, and it looks like there was. I mean, Windham Hill, the way it came together, and it was tremendously functional. The thing worked, but it was never an ambition I had. But okay, let's having moved into acoustic guitar, I don't know how aware I was of open tunings. I'm not sure whether I came to that by myself, and then I learned that some of the things that Fahey and Cocky were doing were in open tunings. But I found something in that absolutely resonated with me, and understand that throughout my entire catalog, there are probably well over 100 tunings that I've used. Whereas most people sort of settle in on open D or something like that. I have more or less created a different tuning for every song that I've recorded.
Wow.
And I've puzzled over that for a long, long time. And I think only recently, I mean, within the last year, have I come to really understand what that strange behavior is about. I think it was a trick I played on myself to remove intellect utterly from the process, because I was in terra incognita. I didn't know where I was. There wasn't an E chord. There wasn't an A minor chord. And so the only thing I had to work with was emotion and feeling. And that by creating this landscape that was unknown to me, the frontal lobes were just removed from the process. So it was pure heart. And again, that's either a discovery or a concept that I've come up with very recently, but I believe it to be true.
Wow, that is very interesting, because, trying to learn myself, it's just there's so much in the brain that you've got to deal with, trying to figure out all these chords and learning up the neck and all that stuff, and you kind of want to play. So that's pretty, I think that's pretty profound. So you also were, I think, working with a school or and doing the music arrangements for something when you were younger, a music house, a theater, or something like that. And how did that play into the development of what you were doing?
One of my friends, Steve Harvey, was considered himself, I think rightfully so, even at his young age, a stage director. He was putting on plays at Stanford University. And we were good friends. There was an archway at Stanford that I'd played in. As a matter of fact, that plays into the whole story in a big way. But people would come and listen to me just sitting in that stairway. And I never put a hat out or asked for any money. The only reason I was there, frankly, was not to get an audience. It was actually rather out of the way in terms of the location of the Stanford campus. But it was a beautiful reverberative space where I would go and play. And so, Steve came in at some point and was directing plays at Stanford and had me come in and play music for those plays. And in some cases, I wrote pieces of music for, there was his rendition of Romeo and Juliet, for instance. The song "Processional" was written for the actors to take the stage there, and then later Bill Ball at American Conservatory Theater wanted to use it, which was an early accolade that I appreciated very much. But it was really just a matter of me hiding myself in this little corner of a reverberative space on Stanford campus and, looking up after having my eyes closed for half an hour and seeing that, there were 10 people or 20 people or 30 or 40 or 50, or as the days went by, 100 or 150 sitting in there. And at some point, somebody said, well, when are you going to bring out a record? And that seemed like a novel concept to me.
So at that point, were you playing open tunings? I mean, you were just sitting and playing for yourself to experience the music from the heart, sort of, as you said. Were you didn't necessarily have a goal other than playing music. Were you using different tunings then?
Yes. Yeah.
So you started off fairly soon using a lot of different tunings.
Yeah, by the time I was in my freshman year at Stanford University, I think I was working exclusively in open tunings.
And how would you describe for, guitar players who haven't used open tunings too much, what that really means or does for you?
Well, as I think I mentioned earlier, for me, what it did was remove the intellect from the process entirely. And the more obscure the tuning, I mean, if you listen to, for instance, the tuning for Impending Death of the Virgin Spirit, if you strum the guitar, it just with open, it just sounds like hell. But something about it, somehow or other, that was, forgive what sounds like a pun, something that was resonating with me. I knew that there was something in there. And really, it's just a matter of loosening strings and bringing it back up into a tone. Really, it is exploration. What is in this? What does this combination of notes offer me emotionally? And then dig in.
And so when people talk about the power of music, I mean, that's part of the reason for this podcast and what we're doing is to, explore that, conversations about what that power is. For you, it was sort of emotion, I think you're saying, but is that what it was? And how would you describe the power of music if it's other than that?
I don't know how far to go into it. There were some pretty heavy tragedies in my life early on. Among them, finding my mother hanging in the shower when I was 12. And to be honest with you, it got much worse after that. I think I found refuge in listening to music. And I think probably that informed my approach to how I expressed music in myself. It was never intentional to create healing music. I mean, it needs to be said over and over again that the process for me was utterly subjective. I wasn't trying to change the world. I wasn't even trying to give the world a gift. I was only trying to be true to the emotion, and some of them very painful memories or new occurrences. I was somebody who needed deeply emotionally to express something that I think words simply weren't capable of doing for me. And again, I think of, me listening to music as a kid and being, whatever form it was, it always meant something deep to me. It was not just surface. It was not background. Even the rock and roll wasn't. It moved me, music has just always done that for me. And that's where I found refuge.
Well, that is pretty profound and meaningful. I often ask on the podcast what have you seen of the power of music, for yourself and other people and all that. But it sounds to me like, I mean, you would just answer that by saying it just gives me refuge and gives many, many listeners of your music and the type of music that Windham Hill put out sort of the same kind of thing. I mean, it is that comforting. It is a refuge. It's not, it doesn't attack you and hit you over the head and, you know, that sort of thing. It just is, it is peaceful to me.
There's, having been the son of the head of the English department, I mean, literature has always been tremendously important to me, but music is certainly as eloquent as writing and does possess more of a metaphorical aspect, which I think appealed to me more. I almost feel that, well, I mean, there were two things that saved my ass. Music was one of them. The other, I think in part, my father didn't know what the hell to do with me after my mother's suicide. And he had a colleague in the English department, a guy named Willard Wyman, who ran these summer trips up into the high Sierras. He had made a deal with the Forest Service where he was subcontracted to build and repair trails in Yosemite. And so I was shipped off for the entire summer, basically working in the High Sierra with Willard Wyman and a group of kids. And the solace I found in nature, being up in the mountains. And, I was a very good swimmer, which is part of why I ended up on the East Coast in a prep school, because I'd been part of the Santa Clara Swim Club with George Haynes and, that whole famous thing. But when we came to the Tuolumne River and we had to get the burros across the Tuolumne River, Bill Wyman would look at me and say, "Can you swim it?" And I said, "Yeah." And I'd be the guy who'd bring the rope across the other side of the Tuolumne River, where it's more or less a cascade, and tie the rope and then bring the bigger rope and then bring the bigger rope and then finally be able to bring the burros across the river. But that business of nature, I think nature had always been important to me, and I could illustrate how that was the case. But the business of being in the power of Yosemite and the mountains, and just there's a spiritualism just in that, and something much bigger than our lives, much bigger than our sorrows, even bigger than our joys. That was also something that absolutely saved my life.
And how do you correlate or think about, music and nature together? How do you, I mean, are they similar? What ways are they similar? How do you put them together for yourself? You're talking about music and nature is really
I don't understand the process, really. Remember that I go to open tunings to find a space in which to work, which is eliminating thought entirely. I'm content with music being a mystery, and however many pieces of music I've quote written, I never feel quite as if I am the soul. Now, this will sound mystical, and I don't want to do that. I don't know where these things come from, and there's no preconception. Again, that's what the open tunings are for. It's like you are lost. You have nothing. You've taken thought out of this. What are you feeling in the moment? How can you express that feeling? And my understanding of it is no greater than that.
Well, you certainly have done a fabulous job of just, conveying emotion and I would say spirituality too in the music. Do you have any thoughts for other folks? I mean, you seem like you have just kind of followed your nose, followed your intuition and your soul, and things happen. You can't really teach that necessarily, but for other people who are out there trying to play music or just struggling through life, any thoughts about that based on what you've done in yours?
Hold on to that. I mean, one of the things that we really haven't talked about yet is how Windham Hill went well past me. You know, that my cousin Alex DeGrassi, who was on the building crew with me, I had to argue with him to finally do a record. You know, running into George Winston, Liz Story, Shadowfax, Michael Hedges. I mean, I think that whole story, I hadn't really envisioned Windham Hill being anything more than myself. But then there's my cousin Alex DeGrassi playing what he was playing. And so, Alex, do you want to do a record? No, I don't really want to. No, you are doing a record, you know, kind of thing. and you know, it just grew from there. Obviously, we found something that the world hadn't quite heard before. I mean, I wouldn't, you know, of course we can all look at influences and the rest of it. I mean, nothing comes from nothing. You know, we had our influences and the rest of it, but something about the zeitgeist of that period of time either created or welcomed what we were doing independently. I mean, I hadn't seen Alex in many years. I'd been out east, right, swimming and you know, on the East Coast. And when he and I got back together, it's like, well, wait a minute. You mean you're writing stuff in open tunings too? You know?
Oh my gosh.
You know, I mean, it was that crazy. And then, you know, Alex and I are doing a show at McCabe's in Santa Monica, and this guy comes up to me afterwards and said, "Hey, you know, do you want to hang out a little bit? And you know, you could crash at my house." And I said, "Sure." You know, and he said, "I play some guitar," and he played some guitar. And then later on that night, he said, "Do you mind if I play the piano for you a little bit while you're going to sleep?" I said, "That'd be fine." And that was George Winston.
Wow.
You know, once again, sheer innocence, no planning, just being open to. And I don't want to paint myself as some sort of spiritualist. I think the closest I come is nature, but I always had pretty good instincts. You know, I mean, and really my criteria was not how fast this guy can play. I mean, Alex is, of course, an insane technician, but he also has tremendous heart. To me, the only thing that mattered was heart. You know, it could be primitive, and if it was expressing emotion sincerely, that was enough for me. And that was what guided Windham Hill. Now, trying to go back to your somehow or other, I needed to get that said. Now, yes. Can you give me your question again?
You know, people struggle with life and struggle with music, you know, and are just trying to figure things out. And I do have faith in humanity, but certainly there are a lot of humans I have faith in, and I think that humans can overcome a lot of this craziness that we have. And one of the tools, maybe it's not even a tool, one of the avenues or ways is to, you know, be open to music and share more music, more gigs around the planet. But do you have thoughts about, you know, things that I might do, other people might do, that can help open up to the types of things you've been fortunate enough to kind of create in your life and the music you've created for others?
I will say once again that none of that would have been a preconception for me. That said, the letters, you know, now the emails that I've received, I mean, thousands and thousands of them, people telling me experiences of how my music has been helpful to them, help them through very, very tough times in their life. And while, again, that wasn't my intent, all I was doing was being sincere about representing what I was feeling myself. Somehow or other, that has communicated to others in a way that was, I think, very helpful to them emotionally through some very difficult times. I never tire of hearing those stories from people, not necessarily for my own ego, but just for the hope that music offering that to people offers to the world. I know, I mean, Eric Satie changed my life when I was 16 and very, very lost. Sarah Klepsch brought me the Aldo Ciccolini recordings of Eric Satie. And if there is any single influence in my life, it really isn't from Kotke or Fahey or the guitarists. It was from Eric Satie. Eric and his beautiful pieces, the Gymnopédie, the Nocien, the Sarabande especially, the Ogive, wonderful. Hearing that music could be powerful in simplicity, I think that Satie gave me the gift of faith in simplicity. It didn't have to move fast. It didn't have to impress. It only had to be honest. And really, no guitarist influenced me as much as a man who wrote solo piano music in the 1880s. I did an early, actually C1008 in the catalog was an album of Eric Satie piano solos by a guy named Bill Quist. Phil Aubergen and I are talking about doing what will be the definitive record of Satie. The Frank Glazier did a very good recording years ago for Vox. Angel Recordings had Aldo Ciccolini recording, and there have been a few other attempts, but I don't believe there is one great recording of Satie. And before I leave this mortal coil, my intent, and I won't stop until I have done it right, to bring out the definitive record of Eric Satie's piano solos.
Okay, well, that's something certainly to look for. Just maybe close up with this last thought. I mentioned earlier Victor Wooten, who was with the Bela Fleck and the Flecktones, and I read his book, The Music Lesson, and have been to his camps, and he's very focused on music and nature. I went to his music and nature camp, and so I think you've really hit on something in your life that is, just fabulous and great, and I really. I can sort of hear it a little bit now in what you're saying and knowing your music, and it's very profound, and thank you so much for the music that you've provided or that's come through you, however you want to say that, and for taking the time to talk about this today. And I don't know if anything else you want to say, but I really, really do appreciate it.
I guess the only thing I would add is for people to be aware of the fact that I'm producing still, 10 or 12 records a year. Some of the people I'm producing these days are every bit as talented as all the Windham Hill. It's, we don't have record stores anymore. It's a little harder to get the word out. But I have some records that I'm calling The Gathering. They're cognate to the Windham Hill samplers, where we would take one track off of every record we'd done in the last year or something like that. The Gathering is that. It's one track from every artist that I've worked with in a period of time. There are now 4 volumes, and if people would like to be turned on to some of the finest players writing and playing today, that's where you would find them. If people do want to write me, email is will@williamackerman.com, and I'd love to hear from people in anything.
Okay, great. Well, thank you so much for taking the time. I really appreciate your doing this, and hopefully we'll see you around the bend sometime soon.
Well, I appreciate it. Thank you very much.
You've been listening to Planetary Gig Talk, Tales of Music and Magic. I'm your host, Jefferson Glassy, Chief Spiritual Dude of the Planetary Gig Society. We talk with musicians and others about the power of music and how we can use music to help create a better world. Please check out our website, www.planetarygigs.org, for information about some of the organizations promoting music and musicians, resources about the power of music, books, movies, articles, including new research on music and the brain. We welcome your support. The Planetary Gig Society is a Section 501c3 charitable organization, and you can donate on the website. You also can receive a free email signature block demonstrating your support for Planetary Gig Society. Please follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook at Planetary Gigs. And we want to thank fabulous musician and teacher Eric Weinberg of Little Eric Studios for the Planetary Gig Talk music titled Chill Kid, It's Saul. So please check out Planetary Gig Talk on iTunes, Google Play, and Stitcher. Subscribe and hear all the upcoming episodes. Thanks very much.